but I don't want to keep people waiting. So with that, I want to start off. We are going to start our work session with the annual report of the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. So Ms. Howard, Chair, is joining us today, and she is going to lead us off. And Ms. Howard, how would you like to organize this? Are you going to give us the report, and you're going to give us an overview of the report, and then we'll take some questions. And if you would introduce your MSAOC appointees as well, and we can move on from there.
Just smash this.
Yes, just press it.
Oh, okay. Because there was a green light already on.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Judy Howard. I'm the current.
I think maybe your microphone is not yet on.
Thank you for having us. Oh, yeah, boy, now you can really hear me. 25 years ago, the Fairfax County Public Schools School Board established the Minority Student Achievement Committee, an ad hoc committee tasked with developing an action plan to improve minority student achievement in Fairfax County. That committee became us, the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. So what is the MSAOC? Who are we? A lot of our members are here, and I'd ask them to stand so you can see us. We are Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, and multiracial. We are young, middle-aged, and AARP members. We come from all over the United States and the world. We are both recent immigrants and U.S. citizens by birth or by choice. English was not necessarily our first language. We are educators, doctors, we have a lot of PhDs, attorneys, retired military officers, IT specialists, government employees, and other professionals. We're volunteers, committing our personal time to MSAOC and the children of Fairfax County Public Schools. We are FCPS students and FCPS graduates. We are the parents of current FCPS students, and some of us are even the grandparents of current FCPS students. We are the proud parents and grandparents of FCPS graduates. We are FCPS employees, past and present. We are teachers, assistant principals, and principals at all school levels. We are specialists who help administer programs within FCPS. We are members of FCPS leadership as well. We are even members of the school board. Many of our members have been on MSAOC for a decade or more. Our current staff liaison, Dr. Lawrence Bussey, has been an MSAOC member since the beginning. Our colleagues, Ralph Cooper and Sylvia Washington, elementary school teacher extraordinaire who retires at the end of this school year, have served nearly as long as Dr. Bussey's. Many of us have served as chair of this committee over the years. Dr. Bussey was the first chair of the MSAOC. Ralph Cooper, George Becerra, Bob Shaw, and I all have chaired the MSAOC in the past, and I'm doing it again. We are, in short, the faces of Fairfax County Public Schools. The MSAOC issued its first report to the school board in 1994. That report focused on the establishment of MSAOC. It also highlighted initiatives that might have an impact on minority student achievement, including curriculum, personnel, minority student participation in gifted and talented programs, guidance counseling, and budgetary concerns. Sound familiar? Today, MSAOC presents its 23rd report to the school board. Much has changed in Fairfax County schools since our first report. We have more students, more schools, and more staff. We are now one of the largest school systems in the country. The school division, which in 1994 had a student body that was 66% white, now is a school system where the majority of its students, 60%, are people of color. We have a national reputation for excellence. Our high schools continually rank at the top in national polls looking at the best high schools in America. Our school board is no longer an appointed body. Members are elected by Fairfax voters. We will welcome a new school board member sometime later this year, and we want to thank Jeanette Huff, who I guess is no longer here, for her service. 4 superintendents and several interim acting superintendents have come and gone. We're getting ready now to welcome the 5th superintendent during MSAOC's long tenure in FCPS, and we'd like to thank Dr. Lockhart for holding things together over the last 10 months while we wait for our new superintendent. And we note that our new superintendent, Dr. Scott Brabrand, is a former member of the MSAOC. As we have done with other members in the past, we look forward to welcoming him back into the fold. While much has changed in the past 20-something years, the saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same, is an apt one. The achievement gap, the disparity between Black and Hispanic students and their white and Asian classmates persists. With regard to the achievement gap and many of the issues that impact this singularly most important and significant issue, we are still waiting. Many of the issues MSAOC has focused on in recent years are the very same issues that MSAOC addressed in its first report to the school board in 1994. And in many reports thereafter. If you look at footnote 1 on page 2 of our report, you can see how many times we've raised many of these issues before. We hope that you've had time to read our annual report before this presentation. Tonight we will highlight some, but by no means all, of our questions and concerns, with the hope of beginning a dialogue that will continue in much more depth in the months to come. As you listen to our presentation tonight and begin to formulate your questions and comments to and for us, please keep in mind that we are an advisory committee made up of volunteers. When we prepare our annual report each year, we have neither the time nor the resources to do more than to issue spot. And we do so at a distinct disadvantage. You see, unlike other school board advisory committees, we do not have offices or departments that support us. There is no Office of Minority Student Achievement. What do we have? We have an amazing part-time, hourly staff liaison who takes care of all administrative tasks relating to the running of the advisory committee, attends and records the minutes for our meetings, responds to committee requests for information and data, and also responds to inquiries from minority parents seeking help with navigating the school system. And that's just a snapshot of all that he does. What we don't have is a dedicated office that is designed to unify the disjointed programs within FCPS aimed at closing the achievement gap system-wide, or an office to provide dedicated and comprehensive oversight and accountability for FCPS on equity and achievement issues, or an office with the personnel to assist parents of color, the majority now of our FCPS parents, with their questions and concerns. We've often been told that FCPS does not need an Office of Minority Student Achievement because minority student achievement is everyone's concern and should be everyone's focus. But as our report this year shows, that approach is not working. We have found that in many different areas, whether the circumstances involved were decisions on which teachers get hired by FCPS, or decisions on which students are suspended from school, or determinations on who is selected for Level 4 center-based programs or for admission to Thomas Jefferson High School for science and technology, something is amiss. We found that when discretion played a role in the decision-making or evaluation process, that is, when individuals made decisions or evaluations that could in part or in whole be based on their personal feelings or perceptions, there was a disparate impact on Black and/or Hispanic students and teachers. Black applicants were less likely to be hired for teaching jobs in Fairfax County Public Schools. Black and Hispanic children were more likely to be suspended from school for Level A offenses. And Black and Hispanic students were less likely to be selected for admission to advanced academic programs. What do I mean by disparate impact? When practices that have no discriminatory intent have a disproportionate adverse impact on people of a protected class, whether it be by race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, you have what may be considered disparate impact, which in some circumstances may have legal consequences. FCPS needs to make a commitment to ensuring that students and staff are treated equitably within this school system. There are several first steps that we recommend. First and foremost, as we stated in our May 1st, 2017 letter to the school board, FCPS must engage independent outside counsel and advisors to critically review FCPS hiring and employment practices. We amend that request in our annual report to include a critical overview of other areas within the school system where disparate impact on minority students, teachers, and/or staff may be found. FCPS needs to determine whether bias of any kind could or does play a role in its employment and other practices or processes, and to make changes to any of those practices or processes as deemed necessary. An external review is now essential. Our findings demonstrate that FCPS cannot do this type of review internally. If that were the case, our annual report and this presentation would be very different. And this is not an unprecedented request. FCPS in the past has relied on outside professionals to provide assistance and counsel on topics ranging from TJ admissions to student mental health and concerns over teen suicides to sleep. Why now are you stalling? FCPS also must support and fund efforts and initiatives that focus specifically on issues of fairness and educational equity. If FCPS really is committed to its touted system-wide theme of equity for the coming school year, you need to put your money where your mouth is and provide adequate funding for FCPS's Cultural Proficiency Initiative, and you need to reestablish an Office of Minority Student Achievement. The Cultural Proficiency Initiative needs to have the staff and funds to expand beyond a basic cultural competency curriculum. Adding one employee to an office of one is inadequate. Give that office the funds it needs to hire all the people necessary to do this most important work. And you need to fully fund an Office of Minority Student Achievement. We provided detailed information to the school board regarding this needed office and how it might be funded last year. We are still waiting. If you really are committed to equity, this is where you should start. Hire outside counsel, fully fund the Cultural Proficiency Initiative, and reestablish an Office of Minority Student Achievement. Now, there is no time to wait. FCPS needs to act affirmatively, seriously, and expeditiously to look critically and transparently at its challenges, to implement any changes to its practices and processes deemed necessary, and to fund the programs and initiatives to do so. Our children deserve no less. Our presentation this evening mirrors our 2017 report. We will begin by discussing the following issues relating to our 2016-2017 school board charge: teacher recruitment and retention, student discipline, and minority student participation in advanced academic programs. In addition, we continue to focus on the role concentrated poverty plays in closing the achievement gap efforts. I am joined here by MSAOC members, Mr. Robert Shaw, immediate past chair of the MSAOC and a parent of 2 FCPS graduates, Dr. Pamela Simpkins, who currently is an assistant principal at Halley Elementary School, and Shirley Norman Taylor, Esquire, a current FCPS parent. We'll begin with our discussion of recruitment and retention of diverse, high-quality staff, and that's me. Our annual report addresses issues relating to teacher hiring and retention at pages 3 through 6. The report speaks for itself. We need better transparency and monitoring of FCPS hiring and employment practices to ensure non-discrimination and to stem turnover of teachers of color. We see no need at this time to discuss the George Mason University study, which we addressed in our May 1st, 2017 letter to the school board and is included as attachment A to our report. Nothing has occurred since that letter was written to change our recommendation to the board. We would, however, like to express our continued disappointment with the school system's response to this study and findings. The GMU study suggests that there may be a systemic problem within FCPS as it relates to teacher hiring. How can you not be concerned about that? Especially when we know the impact on students of not having teachers of color in our classrooms. We also note that our concerns go well beyond the GMU study and issues solely related to teacher hiring. We are very concerned about teacher turnover, and we continue to be concerned about actions and decisions that have a disparate impact on members of our staff, whether we're talking about teachers or principals and other school-based administrators or central-based administrators or other staff members who are people of color. There are too many stories out there to disregard our concerns. We reiterate our call that FCPS engage independent outside counsel to fully investigate FCPS hiring and employment practices and to make recommendations for any changes to FCPS practices and procedures deemed necessary. This investigation should include, but not be limited to, a review of the GMU study's findings regarding alleged discriminatory hiring practices by FCPS, all current hiring practices, procedures, and testing or assessments used to screen applicants for teaching positions in FCPS, and the reasons for minority teacher attrition within FCPS. Thank you. We'll now move on to student discipline and its impact on minority student achievement. Our annual report addresses issues relating to student discipline at pages 7 through 9. I'll now turn this over to Mr. Robert Shaw.
Good evening, members of the school board, FCPS staff, and distinguished audience. Ms. Howard, thanks for affording me the opportunity to do this presentation. As was introduced, I'm going to do talk on student discipline and its impact on minority student achievement. Research has shown that racial minorities are more likely than white students to be suspended from school, a fact confirmed by the U.S. Department of Education for Civil Rights, who concludes that black students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students, while students with disabilities are twice as likely to receive an out-of-school suspension as their non-disabled peers. Guess what? FCPS is not immune from this troubling pattern. As a matter of fact, our study found, for example, that Black and Hispanic students in FCPS continue to be disproportionately subject to out-of-school suspensions for subjective disciplinary infraction as compared to their white and Asian classmates. You may ask, what are these infractions? Disrespect, defiance and insubordination, disruptive demonstrations, classroom disruptions, inappropriate conduct towards others. Now, I could ask you, what is insubordination? What is disrespect? What is defiance? I can ask anybody here. If there are 20 people here, I'm sure I could get 10 different answers. And that's the point we are trying to make. The determination that disciplinary action for these infractions is warranted are made at the discretion of adults, a teacher or a school official, primarily in response to local school conduct codes. These disciplinary decisions are dependent on the value of the adult on what they place on the behavior of the student. Again, let me stress the bottom line here. These are level A offenses and can be addressed in the classroom without referral to principal. I had a lecturer who would say, this is the foot stomper. They can be addressed in the classroom without referral to principals. What are the options to the teachers? There can be counseling by that teacher, restorative justice, peer mediation, behavioral contracts, and/or detention or other out of school or other after-school requirements. The disparity in out-of-school suspensions affects Blacks and Hispanics at all grade levels, including elementary school students. Imagine that. I was so afraid of my teacher back in the days when she said, or he said, I obeyed. We are kicking out elementary students. Wow. I've given you all a handout, and I'd like us to look at suspensions for subjective offenses, which was the 2016 data. The colors you need to pay particular attention to are the blue box, the red box, and the green box. Blue represents the population for white, red for Black, green for Hispanic. This is our data, and it shows that while Black students made up approximately 10% of the FCPS student population, they accounted for more than 40% of suspensions for disrespect at the elementary school level, more than 26% of disrespect at the middle school, and more than 40% of suspensions for disruptive demonstration at the high school level. Hispanic students, who at that time made up approximately 24% of FCPS's student population, accounted for 50% of suspensions for defiance and insubordination. At the middle school level, more than 46% of suspensions for disrespect at the high school level. Why then are Black and Hispanic students more likely to be suspended for these infractions? Something is amiss. When we look at the data for disciplinary actions taken for majority discipline violations such as possession of weapons in school, drug-related offenses, which have mandatory sanctions, we find that students who violate these codes of conduct are removed from schools at comparable rates, regardless of race and ethnicity. In these instances, there is no subjective determination by an adult. It's cut and dry. However, when discretion in discipline is afforded, the rate of removal for Black and Hispanic students is significantly different from the rates of their Asian and white classmates. The data supports MSAOC belief that implicit bias is a contributing factor when discretionary disciplinary action are taken. And I'm going to read for you one definition of implicit bias. Quote, implicit bias refers to an attitude or stereotype that affects our understandings, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated, involuntary, and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. If FCPS's educators are responding to student conduct and disciplining students based on characterizations or stereotypes, whether they involve the student's race, gender, sexual orientation, economic status, language, culture, or situational conditions, they are in fact succumbing to implicit bias. FCPS must take affirmative steps to stop such practices immediately. Teachers need to be more aware of what's in their individual silos. Treat each child as an individual. Find out their needs and address them immediately. I'd like to run by you all some consequences of the actions. Out-of-school suspensions have serious educational consequences. They impact student achievement. They may cause statutory failure of a student's current grade level, and they play a significant role in creating school dropouts, particularly among non-whites or disabled students. As a matter of fact, a report on school discipline in Virginia by the Legal Aid Justice Center observes the following: school exclusions create more problems than it solves. High suspension rates are associated with the three I just read out, plus increased contact with the juvenile justice system. Failure to maintain positive school climate for all students can lead to teacher dissatisfaction and turnover. So it impacts both student and teacher. In closing, I'd like to quote from a conversation I had with a Fairfax County public school teacher recently, and I'm quoting: "Teachers must take into consideration the student's social register. Talk to the students and let them know that their behavior is disrespectful. Most children will respond." I shudder to think that at an elementary teacher, we cannot get the desired outcome to our targeted course of action. Many of these kids are coming to school with survival on their minds. You'd be surprised to learn what happened in their lives last night or this morning. So, please refer to the recommendations we have made. It's quite laid out, quite eloquently laid out in your report, but I'll just issue spots. We need to provide funding for additional staff for cultural proficiency and social awareness training for all FCPS staff. We require priority training in the classroom setting for all FCPS staff who are decision makers on student suspensions to include alternative methods of discipline. We need to instruct staff to institute monitoring procedures that trigger an investigation in all disciplinary decision that may result in a student suspension or expulsion prior to any one of these actions. And finally, we need to provide funding that increases parent understandings of the disciplinary process in general, especially the appeals process for suspension and expulsion decisions. It's been my pleasure bringing this to you, and I'll turn back over to Ms. Howard.
Thank you, Bob. We'll now move on to minority student participation in advanced academic programs. Our annual report addresses issues relating to minority student participation in AAP at pages 10 through 12. I'll now turn this over to Ms. Shirley Norman-Taylor.
Good evening. Fairfax County currently has 167 schools with advanced academic programs, which serves approximately 47,000 students. This is a program that is initiated and funded by Fairfax County Public Schools to provide opportunities for higher levels of achievement for our students. The number of Black and Hispanic students who have been historically underrepresented in these programs are a concern for MSAOC. Some progress has been made in identifying these Black and Hispanic students through the Young Scholars Program, which again is funded by the school, and since 2009, that funding has increased significantly, but it hasn't kept pace with the number of students who are in fact enrolled in the program. This program, the Young Scholars Program, is, of course, a pathway to the advanced academic programs. And right now, there are 84 schools that service roughly 6,800 students. The concern is that despite the growth in the Young Scholars Program, and in spite an increased participation in Level 4 center-based AAP programs, Black and Hispanic students continue to be substantially underrepresented in these center-based programs when you compare their enrollment in grades 3 through 8. For the year 2015-16, there were approximately 14,700 students who participated in Level 4 center-based AAP programs in this county. Of that number, Black and Hispanic students combined to represent 35% of all 3 through 8 graders, but they were only 13% of the center-based AAP participants. And when you talk about 13%, that equals roughly 1,900 students, whereas if you look at the 35% of the students who are in fact in grades 3 through 8, that would be roughly 5,100 students. So there is a big difference there. Their white and Asian classmates, when combined, was 59% of all 3 through 8th graders, yet they combined for over 83% of the center-based AAP participants. The selection, of course, of students involved for the AAP centers include their progress reports, ability test scores, and this gifted behavioral rating scale that adds comments from teachers. The students are then screened by the local school committee and by a countywide central selection committee. And these committees are looking holistically for some kind of compelling evidence that a child's needs can't be met in the general educational setting. However, there is some subjective decision points in the process by adults that are involved. When the teachers give that gifted behavior rating scale, they provide comments, room for subjectivity. At the local screening level, when school staff assesses and makes recommendations, another point where subjectivity takes place. And so what type of training are these individuals who are making these assessments? What kind of training do they have? An example, as they provide with training, are they provided with training on how evidence of giftedness manifests itself, in diverse populations? What oversight is there of the teachers who are given this GSBR rating and the selection process to kind of weed out or try to ensure as best we can that no bias is present? This question or these questions aren't idly asked questions. Rather, there was a recent Vanderbilt University study that suggests that one reason Black students are less likely to be assigned to gifted classes may be because of the greater discretion that the teachers have who actually make the referrals to these particular classes. Certainly, as members of MSAOC, we're not surprised by these kinds of observations, given that our own experiences inform us. Over the years, 2 primary requests received by MSAOC for assistance of parents of color ends up being student discipline and AAP selections. In its local plan for education of gifted for 2016 through 2021, which is filed with the Virginia Department of Education, Fairfax County Public Schools has set a goal of increasing the identification of students from historically underrepresented groups by 10%. Certainly that's something in MSAOC that we applaud. But how do you get there? What are the centralized plans to extend the outreach to reach that 10%? And what are the baseline measurements that are being used to reach the goal? Again, we applaud the commitment, but in addition to increasing the identification of students in these historically underrepresented groups per its state plan, Fairfax County Public Schools must focus on increasing the number of those identified students who fully participate in the program, and also must look at the location of these level 4 centers to investigate whether the locations themselves actually have an impact on student participation by these underrepresented groups. So the recommendations for the advanced academic programs, again, you have all of this information having been provided to you. Number one is more funding for the Young Scholars Program. Number two, Fairfax County Public Schools must not only look at increasing the identity of these historically underrepresented students in the AAP programs, but also must focus on increasing the number of students who fully participate in the programs. And again, how do we get there? Well, the establishment, as you've heard, I think probably twice at this point, of an Office of Minority Achievement to develop and coordinate outreach that will encompass all the AAP programs here in the county would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. We'll now move on to closing the achievement gap, the role of concentrated poverty, race, and ethnicity. Our annual report addresses issues relating to the role of concentrated poverty on closing the achievement gap efforts at pages 13 through 15. I'll now turn this over to Dr. Pamela Simpkins.
Thank you. With protocol being established, I would like to say good evening, and I will focus on the role of poverty. I will not reiterate data points as they are in the report. A few years ago, FCPS implemented the Portrait of a Graduate. As a county, we committed ourselves to identifying characteristics and skills all students would likely have and need upon graduation. This mission was so important that schools were highly encouraged and required to incorporate and identify specific Portrait of a Graduate tenets into the school improvement plan. This laser focus ignited school team discussions on the how and why of incorporating opportunities for students to collaborate, communicate, think critically, show resiliency, and citizenry. Similar to the Portrait of a Graduate, we recommend that a portrait of a child in poverty be developed and implemented. You might ask why. There are many faces of poverty in our schools, and understanding the stories behind our students' eyes begins with understanding poverty. Schools with high percentages of students in poverty have to work, think, and operate differently than other schools. For example, based on the work by Eric Jensen and Ruby Payne, there is a heightened level of stress, depression, and isolation among students living in poverty. To circumvent these factors, schools must be creative in using academic and social approaches to keep students and families engaged. Although there are approaches to support schools in poverty, such as Title I funding, our recommendation to develop a Portrait of a Child in Poverty will guide school leaders and teachers in ways to support our students, not only academically, but also behaviorally, socially, and emotionally. The Portrait of a Child in Poverty will ignite teacher learning, and our hope is that, similar to the Portrait of a Graduate, it will change the culture of our county so that attention is given to our visible yet invisible students. It's been my experience in working in Title I schools for a decade that our workforce needs to be prepared to respond to, not react to, differences in students' social register and how the effects of poverty impacts cognitive processing. We also need to gain an understanding of the effects of homelessness, stress, isolation, depression, and hunger on our students in poverty. Our students are living in survival mode. This knowledge does not happen automatically, but should be intentional, just as intentional and purposeful as our portrait of a graduate. We are a world-class school system. We are a system that cares. Our logo says, engage, inspire, thrive. We need to engage every student. We need to inspire every student. We need to ensure every student thrives, not just survives. The MSAOC has 4 recommendations. A portrait of a child in poverty be developed with goals and action steps to include digital literacy, professional development for teachers, connection to social agencies, and internships for high school students. Secondly, reestablish and fund an Office of Minority Achievement to align our work in closing and eliminating the achievement gap. Thirdly, require full-time psychologists and social workers in all high poverty schools. This is so important. And finally, consider and implement policies related to reducing concentrated poverty in targeted schools. These recommendations should not go without careful consideration and implementation. Our students' future depends on what we do now to support and educate them. Every child deserves to be literate and to have an opportunity to attend college or choose a career that matches their strengths, regardless of their home address or economic status. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pam. Just a few more points. On our status report, every year we do a status report on the recommendations we made in our previous year's report card. And so I just wanted to note that our status report on the recommendations from our 2016 annual report, including comments regarding the staff response, can be found at pages 16 through 18 of this year's report. In that, we briefly address the following issues: the Cultural Proficiency Initiative, which we've talked about already tonight, other closing the achievement gap efforts, policies to reduce economic and social isolation, Region 3, the ESOL pilot program, and preschool Head Start. Many of our recommendations from last year remain outstanding. We hope to see movement on these issues in the coming year. Looking beyond our charge, our report also includes a brief discussion of 4 additional issues beyond our 2016-2017 charge at pages 19 through 20 of our report. And I just want to briefly comment on each of these. On support for immigrant children, we hope that Fairfax County Public Schools will take affirmative steps, including making necessary modifications to its policies and regulations as needed to protect immigrant children whose families may be impacted by immigration enforcement actions. On the superintendent search, I just note that at the time our report was finalized, no final decision had been made as to who our new superintendent would be. We are looking forward to working with Dr. Brabrand. With regard to our Parent Advocacy Handbook Toolkit, we once again reiterate our request for funding to print our handbook and funding for additional staff to produce the handbook and to conduct outreach with schools and parents. This tool was a tremendous tool when we printed it, but it's old. It's out of date. We need to have something like this, and we need to have a paper copy as well as providing it digitally, because what we've learned in looking at the challenges for our students living in poverty is a lot of them do not have either the devices or the access to the internet that allows them to access that information any other way. And those of you who've been around a while know that when we did this handbook, when we first did it back in the mid-2000s, we went around and physically did workshops and gave these handbooks to parents. We didn't just sort of send them out and say, here, pass these out. We required parents to sit down and learn how to use this handbook and help them learn how to navigate the system. And we still need to do that. We have a great need in our school system, probably even greater than we had 10 years ago, to provide something that's very portable for families where they can keep all the information they need about the school system. Finally, we're aware that the school board will finally vote on the proposal to change the name of Stewart High School. This vote is long overdue. The students who made this request did so before their senior year at Stewart began. They now are rising sophomores in college. They've all finished their freshman year. We reiterate our belief that Stewart and Lee High Schools should be renamed and support efforts in the community to do so. We note that in this year's report that institutions of higher education and municipalities, including our neighbors in Alexandria, have taken steps to remove Confederate symbols and rename buildings and roadways. If FCPS really is committed to equity, now is the time to show it. Change the names. Thank you for your time. We hope to continue this dialogue beyond just an hour once a year. We welcome you to attend any and all of our meetings. Our dedicated group of volunteers surprised me when we took a poll to see whether they wanted to continue to meet through the summer. And it was unanimous. Everybody wanted to meet throughout the summer because we feel there's a lot of work to be done. I have to really applaud these folks. They're really committed to our kids, and we really hope to see some real change on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent report. I have several hands in the air. I'm going to start with Ms. Hines.
Thank you. I wonder, before I start, Ms. Mulberg, would you mind, if you could, send out to the school board the summer meeting dates for the MSAOC? Because I would like to attend, and I don't know when they are. So thank you all very much, as usual, for a detailed and gloves off report. I think that's what we need. I will say I did attend the NAACP forum on Saturday morning on diversity and hiring, and we had our Chief of Staff, Marty Smith, board member Janie Strauss, and Amelia, our middle school principal. I'm sorry, what's the last name? Mitchell, thank you. I blanked. And I actually learned a lot. I learned that I think the issues are sort of both potential for not enough attention paid or even implicit bias at the principal's level, because, and I know I'm applying for teaching jobs in surrounding counties, and I apply to the buildings I want to work at. And I know that, principals probably in this environment of a teacher shortage, get a good teacher, grab that person and say, oh, great, I filled a hole. So I think it sounded like it's a little bit of usual practices for principals, but it's also central office not providing support for principals to do more, at the principal level. So I don't know if Dr. Simpsons, if you wanted to comment on that, but I thought it was helpful to hear from a principal at that meeting. But I'm sorry. Ms. Norman Taylor, who's our principal today? I'm sorry, I had the wrong, I apologize. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Well, hiring teachers, it's more than what's on the resume. It's really what's on the resume in addition to the level of commitment that teacher will have to your school and to your students. So trying to find a good match for your school, trying to find someone who wants to be at your school and who will be committed to the students, the curriculum, and being committed to doing the work takes a lot. In my experience, it has been interview after interview after interview. And then once you find a candidate, you're hoping that that candidate is going to fulfill the commitment that they made to you. And I have also experienced opportunities where I've hired someone and then they decided they wanted to go to another school, which left my school with a hole. I've experienced opening a school with substitutes in the rooms as opposed to certified teachers. It is very difficult. So my hope is that we will fill our schools that have the most need, which is typically our high poverty schools, fill those schools first, ensuring that those schools have certified teachers in every building and that it is, set, and that the people in those schools will stay and be committed to those schools for at least 5 years. It is very difficult when you have to start over every single year, training new teachers, training new staff, to build relationships, to understand the curriculum, to get to know the community, to understand the culture of your school. It is very difficult.
Yeah, the panel talked about retention as well as part of the challenge. So thank you. It's complex,
It's very complex.
Yeah,
very.
I appreciate that. Ms. Howard, is it Dr. Howard or Ms. Howard? I'm sorry.
I'm a lawyer.
Oh,
I have
I'm a
a
lawyer
Juris
too.
Doctorate.
Let's
but
call
I
each
don't-
other doctor.
No,
Then.
no, yeah, I don't like it.
So I always wanted someone to come, right? You talked about how much staff is available for the MSAOC compared to other committees, and I think I've heard this before. So if you could give me a little bit of detail about how available staff is when you want a presentation or data or information at a meeting. Do you feel like you can get that even though you don't have, and I'll get back to the Minority Achievement Office, I will in just a second, or department. But have you felt that if you asked instructional services or special services or someone else for information or staff that they will come? And do you feel like you have enough staff at the meetings and on the committee to do the work?
As I mentioned, we have a staff, our liaison, who is a part-time hourly, has a limit on the number of hours he can work on a weekly basis within the confines of the employment arrangement. And all of our requests go through him, and he makes all the arrangements to get information and data from us. Sometimes information and data is immediately forthcoming, and sometimes it is not. And that has been a challenge, and it has been a problem, particularly this year. We set a calendar and we invite people to present to us, and we've had lots of great presentations. Probably the best presentation we had this past year was by Nina Thomas, the program manager for cultural proficiency, who came and did a workshop, a little mini workshop for us, and she is fantastic. But she's one person, we don't have the ability very quickly to pull together information, and we're relying on somebody who works part-time.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, we meet once a month, and things take a lot longer then because we don't have the immediate personnel to pull information. And if the information that we want is not something that's at somebody's fingertips, we're not necessarily the top priority then for getting that done because people have a lot of other work they have to do as well. We've relied on a lot of outside resources, and quite frankly, I feel like our staff liaison, Dr. Bussey, is a miracle worker in what he's able to find and do, and I don't know what we would do without him.
Okay, well, thank you.
Without any kind of office support. And, there was an Office of Minority Student Achievement where that information was immediately available. I mean, we have members of the MSAOC who used to be on the staff of the Office of Minority Student Achievement, and we could get things a lot quicker within MSAOC when that office existed.
Well, and that's why I ask, because it's a resources thing, right? And I just wanted to know sort of what is the resource challenge that you're having. Getting to the question of Minority Student Achievement Office, I am disappointed that the position of Assistant Superintendent for Equity and Innovation has not been filled yet. I think that's been kind of a casualty of the superintendent switch, It's been on the books, and it's been something we've been talking about for months. And, in my meeting with Dr. Braybrown, first thing on my list is going to be, let's fill that spot. And the reason that, here's my thinking, and you tell me what you think. In my research, across the country and talking to board members as well across the country about how they approach this question of equity, what I have heard is that it's best if that position is at a pretty high level, assistant superintendent level, someone who can call on a lot of resources. When you create a position or an office that is at a lower level, sometimes it's window dressing and not much actually happens. So I hope that, I wonder, and I don't want to ask you this right now because it's probably too much in the moment, but do you feel that if we fill that position in the right way, that will provide the support and resources that the MSAOC needs? That would be my hope.
It would certainly be my hope that that happens, but I don't think that even the establishment of that position and the development of what that position should entail should be done without first having that outside independent review to understand exactly what the particular challenges and needs are of this school system, not just relating to hiring, but relating to all the various issues that such an office then might serve, because you want to be able to identify the person to serve that role and even articulate what that role is with a clear understanding of what your needs are. And I don't think that until those are identified very specifically, and there are some real serious issues and concerns that we've articulated in our report. Until you do that, you're going to be assuming what the role should be of this entity without actually knowing what the specific things you want that position and whatever offices it may support doing. And I think that without that kind of overview and an independent overview, I really think it needs to come from somebody looking fresh at it, who's looked at other school systems as well and what they've done, but it has to really be tailored to the specific challenges and needs that Fairfax County is facing now.
Okay, so you're recommending an assessment be done first. Okay.
Yes.
So on these charts, on discipline, I had just a couple questions about the charts themselves. On the left-hand column, the numbers, are these raw numbers of kids? Yes. Okay, all right. So we're basically saying then on the chart for elementary schools, about 36 white students are, for example, are suspended in elementary school in 2015, 2016 for disrespect, right? We're just looking at raw numbers there. Okay, all right, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I knew what that was. And then on the charts as well, Dr. Simpkins again, would you say, so, it's true, when I look at defiance, insubordination, disrespect, I can't tell by looking at them what that means. And there is this problem of, that it is a subjective analysis, right? But as a principal in a building, do you feel like you have some direction, some clarity in terms of what you're looking for? Do you get any of that from central office, or is it pretty much seat of the pants?
Again, all of these, definitions, disrespect, defiance, insubordination, disruptive demonstration, some of those might be defined in the SR&R, but it's not necessarily clear-cut what disrespect is. And that's why I think it is critically important that we understand where our children are coming from, because what's disrespectful what may come across as disrespectful to one teacher may not necessarily be disrespectful or come across that way to another teacher. So, within the school building, that culture has to be set. The expectations need to be set. What will we tolerate and not tolerate? What will our non-negotiables be? And then everyone having that same language across the board in the building. It's very hard when you have a child come into school whose social life at home is totally different than what the expectations are in school. And children will often say, well, my mama said if someone hits me, hit them back. And I tell them, I respect your mama's rules, but we have different rules in school. And so teaching children that there are particular rules in school and that they have to be obedient to those rules takes a lot of work. And it's the work that we have to be committed to doing so that we can reduce this. But the other side of that is helping teachers understand that just because a child says, I ain't going to do that, does not necessarily mean that that child is being disrespectful. It just means that that's that child's social register. And what the teacher should do is take an opportunity to reteach what's expected. Okay, Jose, that's not the appropriate way to say it in school. You can say to me, Dr. Simpkins, you know what, I prefer not to do this. But we have to give them the language so that they understand, so that we're all on the same page.
So this is then obviously an opportunity for professional development.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a couple more questions. I appreciate everyone's patience. Dr. Lockhart, when we talk about the discipline numbers that we have here, and I'm putting you on the spot, so if you don't have answers right now, I totally understand. I'll get them later. But are we still keeping track by school of discipline data so that we can watch for needs for professional development on that sort of thing?
Yes.
We are. Okay.
Yes.
So if the board member wanted to see that, we could ask.
Yes.
Okay.
We do have it broken down.
Okay.
Lots of different ways.
Lots of different ways, right? Okay, I remember that we looked at that a few years ago. And also, do you have a sense, and I suppose I can get this, of how many suspensions now? It seems like we have increased the percentage and number of suspensions that are served on site in rather than sending kids home. We have more SOS or support on suspension on site. SOSA, yeah. Is it true that I mean, I guess what I'm asking for, and I can get it later, is what % of these suspensions would you say are kids who are sent home, and what % are kids who are on site during that suspension time?
The data we're providing is out-of-school suspensions.
That's right.
But when we say out of school,
it's all out of school.
I know, but when we say out of school, sometimes we mean in the backyard of the school in a trailer. So they're not actually home, right?
No,
Or
I think-
no?
No, this
I think
is
that would
out-of-school
be-
suspensions.
Right, I think that would be in-school suspension data.
That's
Is
in-school
that right? Okay.
suspension.
Well, good. I'm glad I asked that. So these are kids who are actually home for the time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Almost done. On the question of advanced academics, I noticed that one of the recommendations is increasing spending for young scholars. And I have to ask whether that really is the best place to put our money, only because we have increased young scholars, and still, as your report shows, we don't really see the kind of returns that we want. And I'm bringing some of my own bias to this because I've been an elementary teacher and I have been a young scholars summer teacher, and then I was back with those kids in the building the next year. And my own feeling is it's a great program, but I don't think in all the years we've had it, it has really made the dent that we need. And I think that's what your report shows. So I'm asking this in context. Is that the best way for us to attack the problem of low minority representation in our advanced academic programs? Or do we need to look a little bit more at the structure of how we do it? I feel like sometimes, and maybe this is more of a comment, but I do want your thoughts. We have parallel school systems from 3rd through 8th grade that are different based on race, ethnicity, and family income. And those kids are completely segregated in most situations, not everywhere, right? But they are completely segregated from 3rd through 8th grade. Not every school system does it that way. And I feel like we try to fix it at the margins. and we keep trying to mess with it at the edges. And we don't ever ask the fundamental question, is this really the best way to meet the needs of every kid? Is this really the best way to challenge every kid in an equitable way? So this is a big question, but your thoughts, I guess.
It's not our.
I'm going to let Judy Howard answer the bulk of that, but let me just say this. One of the things a couple of years ago at an MSAOC meeting, one of the principals indicated that she had no idea who her young scholars were. She didn't know who they were. So that's a problem. That's a problem if you have these kids who have been identified as young scholars and eyes are on them while they're in the elementary, middle school setting, but then no one knows that they're in the building when they get to high school. So that's a problem.
Yeah, and I don't think we're the people to ask that question of. To some degree, we are an advisory committee. We don't have enough personnel to look at this kind of a question. We don't have, that's certainly something that if you wanted us in a future charge to look at in more depth, we could do, but we're not going to speculate on what the best approach would be without really having enough knowledge to do so. We're not going to assume knowledge that we don't have, and I really think that, once again, that kind of a question is part of the reason why,
Right.
we would love to have some kind of a central office that is asking all those kinds of questions and posing them instead of us who meet once a month.
Well, so I recommend to you, that makes perfect sense. I recommend to you the Advanced Academic Parent Advisory Committee, the APAC committee report that we just got a week or two ago, which actually looked at equity and did present other ways to do this that basically don't involve separating kids permanently, all day for years, that there are other ways to do it. Mason Crest Elementary is the example that they gave. So just a thought. But anyway, I've taken up a lot of time. Thank you all very much for all your work.
Mrs. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you, Mrs. Hines, for teeing up my question, because it was exactly on that area. I'm a big fan of young scholars. I think that we need to do more, and I also believe, and I wanted to ask you whether you had any longitudinal data on the success of young scholars, because there was a assistant principal at West Potomac who unfortunately is out on leave right now, but he was collecting a lot of data on the young scholars in the West Potomac pyramid and tracking how they, what schools they came from and how they pursued advanced academics in high school. And I was wondering if you had done any of that?
No, we're not staff. We're an advisory committee, and we do not have the resources or the ability to do that. That is why we keep saying you need to have an Office of Minority Student Achievement where you could have somebody that you could answer those questions for you. All we can do is spot issues that we see in our, and based on experience and the like. If you want to get down in the weeds, we are not the people to do it, and that's not our role.
No, I understand that, but I was wondering if you thought that it was of value to actually have some sort of longitudinal data so that you can actually quantify the success or lack of success of the program. And then the second piece of that is, and I'm very glad you raised the issue of underrepresentation in some of our center programs. I was wondering if you looked at all of the centers in aggregate, or did you actually look at individual centers to see if there were certain areas where there was a more proportionate and representative portion of the centers for minority students? So, for example, are there certain areas of the county where you have a higher percentage of minority representation, or certain schools that recommend a higher proportion of a higher proportion of minorities to our center programs? And that might be our best practices. What are they doing? And then the third piece is, do you really think we should have gibbers?
Well,
And I have one more.
again,
Okay, I'm sorry. The
That's
gifted behavioral rating
so the-
system.
those are two very separate questions. Again, a lot of the things that you're asking us about, we don't have the manpower or the resources to be able to just sort of do all that. Those are certainly questions that we'd have as well if we had the ability to ask those kinds of questions and to get that kind of information. But again, we are a school board advisory committee. We are not staff. We do not have staff to be able to support us to get that kind of information. So we'd love to have answers to lots of those questions as well, but there's only so much that we can do. With regard to the gibbers, I just want to say this, and I will Shirley alluded to it in her presentation. You know, MSAOC sort of serves as the de facto Office of Minority Student Achievement, and minority parents call us and they come to our meetings with their concerns. And as we said, there are two basic topics that are predictably what we're going to hear. A lot of them are discipline, where parents are concerned about disciplinary action that's been taken against their child, and they want help on how to appeal a decision or what they should do. But the other thing we get a lot of is questions from parents where their children, parents of color, Black and Hispanic parents, where their children have not been identified for center-based programs, particularly. And this is not a new problem. I mean, when I was originally on MSAOC back in the early 2000s, we had a GT subcommittee. And every time a new member would come to our subcommittee, they always came because they had a personal story about their child. And when we looked into it, and I had my own personal story for one of my children, and when I looked into it, it was the same thing. And the gibbers was a red flag in a lot of those situations when you looked at what was going on. It's our point about when you're giving people discretion to make decisions or to evaluate students. When that subjectivity comes into it, it is having a disparate impact on Black and Hispanic students. And when we look at advanced academics. So there are questions that need to be answered in that regard. And there are certainly things that we could say, maybe you should start here, but it deserves a lot of inquiry. We need to look at that. Another thing we really need to look at is even when students are identified, whether they're actually participating in those programs, because a lot of them are isolated programs. And if you're going to be pulled out of your school and go to a school where nobody looks like you, you may make a different decision about whether you're going to participate. So I think there's a lot that can and should be looked at in that area. But we're not the people to do it. We're just the people that are going to issue spot for you, but we don't have the resources to be able to do more.
Additionally, I have question. You recommended that we needed to change our policy on sending a message or educating our populations that may be subject to ICE raids. And in that you hold out or you identify power of attorney. And how would you specifically change the policy? Are you suggesting that we have a standard, fill-in-the-blank power of attorney? Are you suggesting that when kids register for school that I just want to unpack that a little bit.
This is actually more based on my personal knowledge. It's not an MSAOC position, but currently there is no provision in the regulations at FCPS to accept any kind of powers of attorney other than military powers of attorney, which are are distinct kinds of powers of attorney that you provide for military personnel, because they're not giving up their custody of their children. If you get deployed, it's just a way to set something in place to have a guardian for your child. But unlike a traditional guardianship, you're not relinquishing your parental rights. And a similar avenue needs to be provided for immigrant parents, because in the legal community supporting immigrants in the DMV, so to speak, they've been, for many, many, many months, they have been providing workshops and doing lots of walk-ins with parents to help them draft powers of attorney. We're having people are drafting powers of attorney regarding their assets and what to do with their assets, so that what happened to the Japanese during World War II does not happen to immigrant families today. But also to be able to draft powers of attorney that designate who's going to take care of your child if you're not there. You're not relinquishing your parental rights. It's much more similar to a military power of attorney. So allowing some kind of a designation that would allow, in those very limited circumstances, for the school system to accept those powers of attorney would be a protection that then, if you're telling parents, if the lawyers are telling parents to do these things, but then if somebody comes and says, I have this power of attorney to be responsible for my nephew or my neighbor's child, and you say we don't accept them, it's not going to help in those situations, because we don't want parents to feel that they're relinquishing their parental rights in those kinds of situations. So providing a similar avenue, and it can be very specifically crafted even within the time periods when you would acknowledge them and the like.
You don't envision us handing parents a sheet of paper and saying,
no,
okay,
I don't.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
And I think that we do need to have some avenue for parents to be able to communicate with the school who it is that is. I mean, even if it's a parent, being able to leave that on file, so it's in a child's cum file, who the individual is, to identify who the individual is who's going to take care of their child if this certain circumstance occurs. This is different from your emergency care person. This is not the person who's going to be available to pick up your child if they have a fever and you can't find anybody else. It's who you are entrusting the care of your child to, perhaps on a fairly long-term basis when you are unavailable. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. And then the last piece is regarding your comments on the portrait of a child in poverty. I agree with the concept of having a portrait of a better understanding of a child in poverty and the stress factors and from where they come. I do have a little bit of a concern about calling it a portrait of a child in poverty as a parallel to a portrait of our graduate, because then it seems like we're addressing we expect a disparate outcome. And so would you consider some other sort of description of what that is and how, because we want the same outcome for all of our children, which is the portrait of a graduate. But from a cultural competency and an understanding of that each one of our staff members and frankly our community should embrace, they need to understand that the starting place for one child may be very different at the beginning of the day than the starting place for another child. And so that was the only reason I kind of took my breath in by calling it a portrait of a child of poverty, because then it seems like it's a permanent situation, and we actually want to break that cycle.
And thank you for that, Ms. Corbin Sanders. You know what? I'm not necessarily married to the name Portrait of a Child in Poverty. We just crafted that as a parallel to the Portrait of a Graduate, just to bring understanding as to, we want to have something that that we can learn from, like what are the specific things that a child in poverty would need, and building the professional development around that for teachers so that teachers can understand that, because it is different when you're working with children in poverty. It can be named anything. But the important thing is that we just want to have something built where teachers can understand and get that knowledge about how what is it, when a child comes into our school who's homeless, what does that look like? What do I have to do differently in my classroom because I have a homeless child in my class? I can't say to my kids, okay, I'm going to give you all homework and, you take it home and get it done. Well, if that child is homeless and that child doesn't have a place to do homework, then what do we do differently in our schools? How do we provide that background knowledge for teachers so that teachers will understand I've got to differentiate in quite different ways for kids in my classroom? If, like you've got 22 kids in your school who are homeless and you don't know where they go at night, you don't know if they're in a car, you don't know if they're in a doubled up dwelling, you don't know if they're in a hotel, so you've got to do things differently. I'm not necessarily married to the term Portrait of a Child in Poverty. It can be whatever we want to name it, but the important thing is that we just build a structure so that we can learn how to best serve our children.
And I fully agree with you, and I think that we're in alignment on that. I just don't want to see that as our expectation of the outcome for those children. And I agree also with my colleagues that have said that we really do need to have a priority on filling that assistant superintendent position on equity going forward. So thank you very much. It was an excellent report. I appreciate it.
Ms. McLaughlin?
So I have very much enjoyed being the liaison again to MSAOC. I really want to commend Judy Howard and Larry Bussey and Bob Shaw. You have all reached out to me throughout the academic year. We've met whenever there have been concerns with the committee. We've talked about progress, things that you've needed. And so I want to thank you. And I appreciate very much when Judy says they're an advisory committee, they're not an extension of staff. To the issue of Dr. Bussey, I think what I understood Ms. Howard trying to explain is that because he's only part-time to our system, he's got to do work for his job in a part-time level for the system. So then having additional time to serve an advisory committee is where it becomes more challenging. And so I think that while everyone has loved the work Dr. Bussey's been doing, I think it's more of a matter of looking at, do we need to consider if he wants to be working additional hours so that he can serve the needs of the committee? But I do find that there's just a limit in hours in the day that he's been able to do his job plus serve a committee. And I think that's a lot because most of our staff liaisons are full-time employees, and so I think that presents a problem. I want to also express my deep appreciation for this incredible report. It reads beautifully. It's very data-oriented, and for somebody like me, that's really helps to lead where this next discussion should go. I am concerned that you note in this report that it's your understanding that there's evidence that students of color, minority students who have test scores and comparable or higher test scores and grades for the AAP program and yet are not being selected when compared to white and Asian students with those comparable test scores and grades, and that the gibbers may be playing a role. I think that's an excellent example where then we need to do a deeper dive and understand what that is. And being able to construct what does an Office of Minority Student Achievement look like that's a role. We've got amazing programs and staff doing really incredible progress on closing gaps. But to Ms. Howard's point, if we don't have an office, an easily identifiable office, the community doesn't even know where to go. So they're going to the school board's volunteer advisory committee with concerns that they have, because that's what they can locate. I will make the plug again as I did last year. When Montgomery County Public Schools across the river has an Office of Equity with 8 full-time staff members, and our school system doesn't have an identifiable office and identifiable staff that serve this issue directly, I think that's problematic, given there's a history that we had it, then we didn't have it. And I am very confident that our new incoming superintendent, Dr. Brabrand, the work he was doing in the city of Lynchburg is fantastic in terms of wanting to close gaps and be very intentional in his work. I know Dr. Lockhart is very committed to this. We as a board asked him not to hire that position for strategic innovation and equity, because we wanted to make sure that the new superintendent could bring their vision to it. Since our outgoing superintendent, it was kind of a new creation. I don't want to take up time tonight, but I'm not even sure that I necessarily like that design. I brought up as the liaison to Dr. Garza well over a year ago that we need an Office of Equity. She then said, well, we're going to do the strategic innovation. We could add that in. I don't really know that I can wrap my brain around that being the best model, but that's why we have a new superintendent coming in to work with leadership team, discuss with the board, look at best practice at other school systems around the country, including Montgomery County, and let's see where we're at. Covering other things, which I will say my 2 prior colleagues who already spoke, it's lengthy. I've got my stopwatch running. It's already 4 minutes and 40 seconds. So I can tell that this is a topic and something that we all care about. To the George Mason study, I know you said we weren't going to talk about it, but it's referenced in the report, the commitment of the school system to ensure that we are dedicated to diverse hires and having diverse representation among our employees, I think is very much a commitment of this board and of our leadership team. My concerns with the George Mason study, that is part of a deeper work that the system needs to do, and I support in concept your desire that there be a deeper analysis of what that study was. We can say that there's flawed methodology in it, there's missing data. It takes 1 year's worth of data and makes an extrapolation of a school system that has had 5 more years of hiring practices since that data set that they analyzed. But my concern is that we're also missing a key data point. So the best analogy I can give you is a university can have an applicant pool, just like Fairfax County had an applicant pool. And then the university can have their enrolling freshman class. And you can say, okay, what was the percent of diversity in your applicant pool? What was the percent of diversity in your enrolling class? The key data point that's missing is how many did you accept? Because I really appreciate the principle, you teed this up very much, the scenario of we could have incredible minority applicants and they got multiple offers. And when we're trying to be competitive with our pay and our benefits and they got hired somewhere else, that's the middle data point that we need to somehow try and capture, because we still need to know what percentage of our minority students, minority applicants were in the applicant pool, but how many got offers? That study doesn't have that. They only have how many accepted the offer and took the job. So I just wanted you to know that none of us takes that study lightly. We are committed to looking into it far more deeply, and that we need to partner with our community in making sure they understand that dedication. And then in terms of at a macro level, this report, we've had this conversation, Judy, that it is so important that you all bring this to us in June, and you don't want to wait until January to get a response back. And so I think, Chairman Evans, we will need to, as a board, when the time or conversation is going to happen. You can always task governance, but we do need to figure out how are we going to work with staff in a reasonable timeline to get responses back to the committee so they can have an understanding of here's the recommendations and then what was the response, and that the board's going to need to own what staff is saying in response to it. So for example, your report lays out some pretty clear recommendations. Whether I'm the liaison next year or whoever else is, we should be able to meet with the committee once we get the staff response and say, here's the staff response to your recommendations, and it's concrete, it's substantive. They know whether your recommendations were taken and what's going to happen and what's the follow-up on those things. So, and then finally, I just want to say that I know there's a concern when you have subjectivity, but I would also want to give a counterpoint. Holistic review beyond sometimes raw numbers can also be valuable too. You know, that we would want to, when we look at even like TJ admissions, a holistic review of taking into account who are the applicants and what can we understand about all of their talents and abilities beyond just what's on that page, hopefully actually allows us to take into context, is this child first generation college? Is this child coming from English as a second language? Maybe is just learning language, but has an aptitude that they don't want to close down barriers. But I think your overall, your recommendations as a composite are going to be a great roadmap for this board. And I really do want to thank you for this very substantive work you've brought here tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik.
Yes, thank you. Just listening to my colleagues, looking up a few more data points. First of all, I miss MSAOC. So it's good to see you here. It's such a robust report, and even though you continue to claim, Judy and your team, that you are only a group of volunteers, unfortunately right now this is where we are getting quite a bit of data gathered in one place. So whether we are, and I fully support us having this position of equity and innovation, and I think I'm trying to reopen it. You have pointed out so many of the areas that I think we can all pretty much agree will need to be addressed in that office, from recruitment and retention, which, we talk about quite a bit here, and I know HR is addressing this in many ways, but we have so many questions. What works to recruit in our highest poverty schools? What works to retain teachers there, right? And to make sure that people are staying there? Is it additional time? Is it additional resources? Is it something else, right? These are the kind of questions that I think we continue to grapple with, and we're really looking for, outside expertise and someone really in a team really dedicated to looking at these best practices, what's worked in systems, what's been tried and not worked in systems. So I think that's one area. And as a teacher who went into a school that went from very little diversity in the staff to increasing it through apprenticeship programs, right? What are the things that can work to bring teachers and to know that they will be a good match for the school? Because I think that's huge, right? Matching the culture of a school and being able to address that, it is a big issue. Student discipline. I appreciate you putting this data together. I know it is specific, and we haven't seen this before, so it's interesting to start to look at and try to figure out what's there, what's not there, how can that be addressed, and how can we break it down through school. So, I think there are just so many points, advanced academic programs, and I echo so much of what was said before me. We have a couple in the Falls Church Pyramid. There's not a single AAP center at the elementary schools, right? But we have Mr. Perry and some other schools, Graham Road and my system, that are opening local level 4 programs and ensuring that more students have access to advanced rigor in their community, and that we build that and we ensure that kids, even if they weren't identified right away, that they do have access to that. Young scholars, I wouldn't have applied to TJ if I hadn't participated in the 7th grade program. I think it was Quest no. I understand, but it's a little bit looking at cohorts. So as I work with students in one of my communities who are looking to do advanced academics, advanced programs, it makes a difference to see them work together, right? There's a group of 5 in Graham Road who know that they want to do rigor and they want to start looking at perhaps TJ or perhaps, advanced academics together. And it does make a big difference to feel that you're not going to be alone and that you're going to fit in and have peers with you. So, I mean, there's so many areas. Marshall High School now, 11th and 12th grade, all students are in the IB English program, and that is huge. So we do have some programs that are working really well. And looking at concentrated poverty. And I appreciate Ms. Corbett-Sanders mentioning the name, which also gave me a little bit of pause, but I appreciate the sentiment and what it is that we're trying to do, and trying to educate and support students and educate teachers. Just as we want to teach students the expectations we have of them and what it means, we need to do the same, right, for our staff so that they know what this means. If it's something they may not understand, may not have experience, may not really see the values and things that are coming to them. So I think there's so much in here, and I appreciate the recommendation to have an outside counsel come in as well and look at our issues. I think you've identified several that I would have pointed out as well. I guess my question would be, do you have examples, as you say, ask us to look at outside counsel for what Fairfax County specifically needs? Because I know a lot of us do reading and we go to conferences and we talk to other experts. So what are your recommendations if it is to have this looked at before we hire someone?
I've actually spoken to Dr. Lockhart about our recommendation, and I guess we'll say stay tuned and sort of we've discussed it, but this is not the time it's at the very beginning stages of a discussion, and so I'm not going to specifically name names of people who have not made a commitment to do anything at this time. I just want to note to you, just because you're probably in Visions and not in Quest, because you are too old to have been in Quest. But because I was the program manager for the Quest program at one point, so I know a bit about Quest. I will note this, though, that both of those programs were administered by the Office of Minority Student Achievement. Again, where you see lots of things that have disappeared over time, along with the disappearance of that office. So, that's why we keep hammering home that, and I would hope that that when some decision is made as to having that kind of an office, that it isn't just sort of a bastardized, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to add this on, or let's figure out something that's really going to work, that's going to bring together oversight of all the disjointed programs that we have here. You have different departments overseeing different parts of our efforts, and that all needs to be under one umbrella. There needs to be somebody who hears everything and knows what's going on. Somebody, when I don't mean just one person necessarily, but who has the superintendent's ear, but who also can begin to tell you when there are issues or problems, whether there are systemic problems, to ask the questions about, do we have school discipline issues? That can we look at it by school? Can we look at teacher hiring by individual school and figure out whether there are certain schools that when that their idea of fit and finding the right fit is not what you legally can or should be doing in terms of finding the proper fit. When I have someone like Dr. Simpkins talking about how she hires for her school, I'm not worried, because she's exactly in the GMU study. They say that the people that were most likely to hire Black teachers and a diverse teaching force were Black principals. We didn't talk about the GMU study in detail. That could be a very long, involved conversation. We're not saying it's perfect. We're not saying that there may be issues that individuals who, the psychometricians, may have problems with their methodology. But none of us who read it doubted their conclusions, because we know the stories. We hear the stories. We know nothing they said was not believable. And sometimes it wasn't unbelievable because people had those experiences themselves. But what we're concerned about is that this study raises very, very critical questions about practices within this school system. And teacher hiring is just, as I say, the twig on the branch of the tree in the forest. And we gave you a couple more branches in our annual report, and showing you other areas where, when discretion is playing any kind of a role in decision making, if it's having a disparate impact, you have to look at it. Certainly holistic reviews, in colleges and universities have worked really very well. And we need to know then, what aren't we doing when we're doing it, that we're not getting the same kind of outcomes that they are? And, those questions haven't been asked. That's why we keep saying you need to have outside, independent professionals come and look at this. It needs to be done by somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight. It needs to be somebody who, if we're going to look at teacher turnover and why teachers are leaving, it needs to be done by people who teachers will tell you why they're leaving. They need to, and they're not going to tell anybody who's in this school system. And they need to have the ability to communicate and speak very candidly about their concerns. We need that in terms of the workplace in general and the school system as well. And people want to keep their jobs. People don't want to burn bridges, but we need that information if we're really going to serve children well, because our teaching staff does not reflect our students, and our student body continues to change, and our needs change, and the needs of our students change. And if we're really going to move forward, the Fairfax County is doing a lot, and we sit on the Successful Children and Youth Policy team. I'm on the Community Schools Subcommittee on that. There's a lot of work being done, and it's not just work that needs to be done by you or a principal in a school or whatever, but there are some problems. There are some real serious concerns, and they need to be addressed, and we hope that they will be.
Thank you. And I think on this board we do agree, and I think we would like to address the fact that this hasn't happened, especially in the last couple of years. A lot of things we've been dealing with change, I think, has put some of this work on hold. And I believe my colleagues and I, at least many of us here at this table today, I can't speak for all my colleagues, definitely want to make sure that this happens. And so I know that it's frustrating, and I know that there's more that we want to happen, and I know that we wish we had the funds to do it all next year, right? And I know that it's not all about funds. And I understand you'll be meeting with Dr. Lockhart. I would love to know what some of these recommendations are, because, I think our idea was, let's start with filling this position. But I would really like to hear, is there a reason and a valid way for us to start before we fill that position to have more of a plan? And I understand this might not be the place, so I would love to hear more of that, because things you say here, like our dashboard, are things some of my colleagues and I have been talking about. What should the dashboard look like? What should be on this dashboard? What data is important? Because some of this will be quantitative, some of it will be qualitative data, right, that we are collecting, whether it's us or an outside agency. And so what are the kinds of things that do work? I have also seen diversity work not led well. And so I want to make sure we're not going down the road of hiring someone and putting something in place that will not work. And I think we're all on board with that. So I think we all really appreciate the information that's being shared. And if there are more conversations that we can have this summer, and as we work with Dr. Braybrand, I know that we want to make sure, and I know it is in front, and we want to make sure it is at the top of his list to help us figure out how to move this work forward, because that's where we are now. It has to happen. So I really appreciate it, and even the community things, Legal Aid Justice Center, we've been having conversations, right, about some of the work they're doing at the immigration panel we had 2 weekends ago. And to know what are the barriers in our system and what are the things that, we can support our family. So thank you. I hope we continue this conversation. And once again, I think we all really appreciate the work. And my colleague would like to know, when did divisions end? When did MSAOC end? No, the office.
The Office of Minority Student Achievement, the most recent time, it was around 2009. Is that right, Larry? Or some of our MSAOC members were in that office around that time. Was it around 2009? No. So it was 8 years ago.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palchik. I have two more board members, and then I have a few questions of my own. I do not want to cut off this very important conversation. I do want to remind board members, though, that we have another advisory committee report coming up, too. Mrs. Strauss.
Thank you very much. I won't repeat some of the questions that my colleagues have asked. A lot of my questions have already been asked. Thank you very much for this very honest report. And we certainly do not want to have disparate outcomes for children. So I think we take these recommendations to heart in identifying students for whether it's AAP or anything else. I also don't want to go back to a time where it's only a test score, because I think that is also not a road to go down, but we certainly don't want any disparate outcomes, period. I also would hope that we would go ahead and fill the position for equity and innovation. And I hear you, Ms. Howard, about us understanding what are the things that need correcting in the school division, but we've waited many months to fill this position and actually begin to put substance to this office. I don't want to wait any longer, but I agree. We need to figure out what it is. And I know that we will be looking forward to help to make sure that that we are looking honestly at ourselves and figure out where we need to go. But we need to get started with this. It was interesting. This was when we were, again, having to make $40 million in cuts once more. This was a position and an office that we did not cut. The money, at least to begin with, is there. In the out-of-school suspension charts, these are really very interesting. I thank you. Obviously, we have done a lot more with our SOSAs and, again, trying to keep youngsters in school. We don't want them out of school. And keeping those positions in the budget, and also restorative justice, all those other pieces. And it was interesting when you indicated that for some of the more serious infractions where there's a clear definition, that there seems not to be a disparate impact. Thank you very much for that clarity. So I will not take up any more time. Oh, one small correction on page 13, Hutchison Elementary is Region 1. It's one of my schools. You had it as Region 3, so it is one of mine. Anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Moon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many of my questions have been already asked, and being mindful of the time, we are about an hour behind our schedule. I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions. One on out-of-school suspension data, along with the recommendations, based upon those data, and also a minority student participation in advanced academic programs as you related to some of those evaluation criteria, which may be include subjectivity of the evaluators. First, on the out-of-school suspension, they are looking at, thank you for the data. whether you've been able to get, maybe I can ask our staff, since I understand you're not staff, you're just advisory committee, in pointing out where the potential issues may be for us to look into, whether these overall discrepancy, this I'm looking at among different groups, whether the teacher's racial background makes any difference, whether we have that kind of data in terms of meeting out, suspensions.
We don't have that data. The data that we have comes from the reported data that the Fairfax County Public Schools has to submit to the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. We looked at the EDSL dashboard, suspensions by school level.
Okay, I would ask.
We don't, if they get further down in the weeds, we don't have that information, but you are the person who could ask and get that information instead of
I'll have the
us.
conversation with Dr. Locker offline. And the next question has to do with a participation of minority students in advanced academic programs. I read your report. It's a very good report, but I must have missed this piece of information where earlier my colleague from Braddock District mentioned about, given maybe equal grades or test scores, the subjective evaluation, when that comes in, there's a disparate impacts. I somehow missed that part, whether you were looking at test data or grades plus the subjective evaluation added to it. I somehow missed that from your report. On which page can I find that?
We didn't get down into the weeds on that. We just sort of are really issue spotting, but there is a statement in there in whatever pages the read.
Under the AAP section.
So that it's somewhere between pages.
Okay, I'll ask Mrs. McLachlan.
Pages 10 through 12 are the pages that we address advanced academics. So
thank you. And for just one last question, additional question regarding that. You're not necessarily advocating for us to do away with the subjective criteria, whether it is gift to behavior rating systems or some other elements in TJ admission.
Well, as you know, I'm not going to say anything about what should be done at TJ admissions.
Okay. I could ask other
committee members. Well, I don't know that we haven't really looked at TJ admissions in general. I personally, I'm a former director of admissions for TJ, so I don't. I actually haven't kept up with what they are doing or not doing. We're just saying we're not telling you how to do anything. We just think you need to look at the processes and make sure that all we're saying is when you find disparate impact anywhere, it should raise a flag to look at it, to look at whether there's a reason for it and whether there's anything that can be done about it. We're not giving you solutions. That's not our job or responsibility. That's not our things we can do professionally. I could probably do that professionally on TJ admissions, but not as a volunteer. But that's not what our job as an advisory committee is. Our job is to issue spot and raise questions for you. We'd like to see solutions that don't end up having a disparate impact on children of color.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. That's what I have.
Thank you very much. And I could have many comments and questions. Some of the topics have been covered, but what strikes me is that there are some things here that should be pretty easy to do. Whether we call this a portrait of a child in poverty, I think I tend to agree with Ms. Corbett Sanders that perhaps we could come up with a different title for what we're doing, but I think that's a creative idea. I see where you're going with this. The children who live in poverty simply have a different experience. They come to us with different stresses. They come to us with different needs. They just do. And so I would welcome that, something that would show us what do we need to focus on. And you've given us some ideas. I mean, certainly having more psychologists in our high poverty schools. We know that things like reunification puts huge strains on a child. Having been separated from a parent for a decade, raised in another country, coming here with no English, and then suddenly being part of a family, and particularly if it's a family still living in poverty. So I would welcome something that would be useful to all of us as we look at creating equity in our school system. And that's something we talk about a lot. We talk about it a lot with One Fairfax, and I think we've all indicated that we want to get going as soon as our new superintendent is here with the new position on equity. I think you've told us loud and clear that you think we need an Office on Minority Student Achievement, and you make a very good case when you say that people come to you when they have a question about discipline, or whether they have a question about advanced academics. Certainly, we should have a place where parents know they can go, whether that's an Office of Minority Student Achievement or whether it's an Office of Equity and Innovation. I think we should be able to turn that around. The Advocacy Handbook, I have to say, we've heard this many years now, haven't we, that we need to print it up. And I don't think we need to print it up for every parent. Not every parent needs this in hard copy. And some parents, if they do need it in hard copy, they can print it out, right? But I do believe that we need it for some. There are plenty of people in our school system who just plain don't have a computer at home. They just don't. And I think we even have a number. It was in your report about how many don't have internet access. And if they have to go to the library every time they want to access the Advocacy Handbook, that's just not good enough. So I don't know if we ever got a cost estimate on that, but to me that seems like it would be a pretty doable thing to do. And just my opinion as one board member that, and if we're really going to reach out to parents, we need to make sure that those who really can't access it do have access to it. On the power of attorney for immigrant students, I think that's certainly, particularly if we have a model, and I don't know if Dr. Lockhart, this is a question for you or if it's a question for our attorney, but the issue, Ms. Howard, is that people have powers of attorney, like an uncle has a power of attorney, and you know of cases where we're not recognizing that, even though the parent is not with us. Is that the issue?
Well, yeah, the only kind of power of attorney that's recognized in the regulations is the military power of attorney, and otherwise, the regulation specifically states that powers of attorney are not recognized.
And so, in those situations, are children just not going to school anywhere? Do we?
Well, the thing is that most of the time, people don't have powers of attorney with regards to their children, because
right.
Unless it's very temporary. But most people, you write your will, you name who the guardians are going to be, the legal guardians are going to be of your children, and you make those provisions for what's going to happen otherwise. And part of the reason I believe that the school system doesn't generally recognize powers of attorney have to do with residency and who can come to school in general, yes. Because you don't want people to just sort of give a power of attorney to cousin Joe so the kids can go to Fairfax County Public Schools instead of to
Yes,
the,
okay.
the public school in whatever county in Maryland they live in.
So
I mean, we saw that a lot with TJ admissions where people would
Yes.
apply and try to, so that's why you want people to have either, and the requirement is then that if you have custody of a child, you have to have legal custody, which is court-ordered custody of a child. But the reason why they have military power of attorney, and we're using that as an analogy for immigrant families, is these are not parents who want to relinquish their parental rights. They just want to have provisions made for their children when they cannot be here through no power of their own.
And that's where I'm thinking there must be a way for us to carve that out legally where, I hear what you're saying about you don't want just anybody to be able to say, okay, you know, we're going to pretend you live with your aunt and now you can go to this school. But I would think that in a case where someone has been deported, you know, that's not something that anyone does, you know, on purpose, you know, any more than it would correspond to my mind with a military deployment. It's something that you're told you have to do, and I'm just saying it's not completely analogous. I'm just saying that this is not somebody who has left the country voluntarily, or somebody whose child is in this situation voluntarily. So I would think we could carve out a legal exception for a situation like that, because if the alternative is the child has nowhere to go, I don't even know what we do in that case, because if the parent isn't there and they can't go to Fairfax County Public Schools, presumably they can't go to any other public school either. So I would hope we could deal with that, and I would hope that would be relatively easy to do. And then the big one for me is the concentrations of poverty. You know, we've talked about this before, and you know, several of these areas that you talked about are in Mason District. You know, in terms of that's a much bigger conversation than we can have in the next 2 minutes. But that's someplace where I think we really need to focus our efforts. I think it's our next really huge task that we have to undertake to figure out how we can avoid that. And there are some areas where I noticed that there was a reference in here to boundary changes. There are some parts of our county where boundary changes just aren't going to do it. You know, it's not. They're not. So we need to be thinking of other solutions. And you know, I think this board needs to be thinking about that, and I hope the MSAOC is thinking about that as well, whatever solutions you can bring us. And I understand that part of what you do is you bring us the issues and you show us concerns, but I think we all need to put our heads together on that one, because it's huge. And then lastly, the higher rates of teacher turnover at high poverty schools. Did you request data on that by chance, or did you not?
No.
Dr. Lockhart, do you know, do we have something like that in hand with turnover rates at our highest poverty schools versus our lowest poverty schools?
So I guess 2 years ago, when we significantly sort of shifted the work of priority schools into Project Momentum, we did run that report for all of our Project Momentum schools.
Okay.
As it related to turnover, and I think it might have been over the course of the last 5 years.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily something that we have readily available. Like we had to do some work to do that. So it is possible to get it. Mm-hmm. It's not sitting on a desk.
Well, I think we also had hoped that Project Momentum itself would help remedy that. So perhaps when we next review Project Momentum, mm-hmm. that would be an opportunity for us to see how successful those efforts have been, because that's a huge issue. And of course, I'm pleased that we give some priority to the high poverty schools, because they do need it. But I think that's something to kind of put in our file for something that we'd want to look at is what has that done to the comparison between our highest poverty schools and our lowest poverty schools. And with that, did you ever go back, Ms. Sure.
With your portrait of a child living in poverty, something you didn't have in there, and I'm wondering if it would be worth putting in there, is the mobility, the number of times a child moves, because that is a level of stress and anxiety that most of our children don't have to deal with, but there's been a lot of documentation on the impact of mobility rates on a child's success because they can't develop those relationships that are so important. And so as you look to renaming it, also maybe putting in there about mobility rates.
We're not going to be renaming it because we're advising you that this is something that the school system should do. We are not going to come up with the portrait of a student or whatever it is. We want you to do that. Okay. I must say, I'm getting the impression, since it's like 10 minutes of 9 and we started at 6:30, and apologies to all you folks from ACE who are saying, my gosh, when are we ever going to get here? And why didn't I eat dinner before I came? Yeah. We feel your pain because we always were last in our presentations, and there were 2 groups before us, so we understand that. But so we apologize for that. But and hopefully this dialogue will continue beyond now, but I think it also shows that, that maybe in the future, we need to be scheduled by ourselves.
That may be. I was actually thinking the very same thing, that because we have a lot to discuss with you every year. So Ms. Howard, Mr. Shaw, Ms. Norman Taylor, and Dr. Simpkins, thank you so much for your excellent presentation. And we will take just a 2-minute break for the technical folks, and then we will have our ACE Advisory Committee.